This is the most terrifying battle no one talks about. In February 1943, the Japanese were advancing through the Solomon Islands. The Allies knew that if the Japanese took this island, Guadalcanal, it would be game over. They'd be too close to Australia. So the Allies did something crazy. They flew in thousands of soldiers and supplies during the night, landed them on the beach, and then flew back to Australia before the Japanese could find them. It was like a scene straight out of a movie, but this is where the story gets crazy. As the Allies retreated, the Japanese began bombarding the beaches with artillery fire, and when the smoke cleared, there were only 150 survivors. But here's the thing, the Allies didn't have enough supplies for all of these men anyway, so they left the wounded and the dead on the beach, got on their planes, and flew back to base. This is where the story takes a dark turn. Sometime later, some of the Japanese soldiers began to notice something strange. Some of the wounded men on the beach were moving. Now, you might be thinking these were probably ants, but this is where the story gets even crazier. You see, those men weren't actually wounded, they were dead. And what these Japanese soldiers had stumbled upon was a beach full of zombies. Okay, now let me explain. These so-called zombies were actually corpses that had been reanimated by a combination of botulism, toxin, and tetanus bacteria. Here's how it happened. When the Japanese bombed the beaches, they killed a bunch of Australian soldiers. Some of these men had eaten food that was contaminated with botulism toxin, which can cause a rare illness called malignant hypothermia. This makes the body go into a state of constant muscle contraction, which makes it look like the person is dancing or having a seizure. But that's not the worst part. The men were also infected with tetanus bacteria, which causes an illness called lockjaw. This makes the jaw muscles contract, which prevents the body from decomposing. So these men didn't actually die from the battle. They died from eating bad food. But the real reason this is the most terrifying battle no one talks about is because the Japanese didn't know any of this. They thought they were fighting against actual zombies. Here's what happened next. A Japanese medic named Ishii Shig died after being bitten by a mosquito. When he came back to, he saw hundreds of the reanimated corpses shambling towards him. He tried to shoot them, but his gun was empty. And when he looked down, he realized that his hands had turned into claws. Okay, I'm just kidding. That didn't happen. But what actually happened was this. As the Japanese advanced on the beach, they encountered more and more of these corpses. Eventually, they found a wounded Australian soldier hiding in a cave. They took him back to their base and put him in a prison camp. But here's where things get weird. As the Japanese were interrogating the Australian, they noticed that he wasn't really responding to their questions. In fact, he was acting kind of weird, like he wasn't really there. So they put him in a room with some other captured allies and locked the door. But the next morning, they came back to the room and found all the prisoners standing in a circle chanting weird words. They had no idea what was going on. But as the story goes, the Japanese were never able to capture the Allies' communications. So they never knew that these men were reciting the entire works of Shakespeare. Now, this isn't actually true. The Allies did communicate with the Japanese a few times, but they always responded in ways that made no sense whatsoever. Like sometimes they would answer questions with riddles, or they would talk about things that had nothing to do with the war. For example, one time the Japanese asked them where their weapons were hidden, but the Australian just started talking about the weather. Another time they asked where their reinforcements were coming from, but the Australian started talking about the mating habits of penguins. The Japanese were totally confused. They had no idea what these allies were doing, but the reality was, the allies had discovered something that we all know today. Laughter is the best medicine. Alright, thanks for watching. See you next time.